Russia investigation. The president distances himself from a campaign advisor who admits lying to the FBI. Catholic judicial nominee. A report from Capitol Hill as senators debate the nomination of Amy Barrett. Remembering the Reformation. 500 years later, we mark the day Martin Luther is said to have nailed his thesis to the church door. And a Catholic approach to Halloween. We take a look at the holiday's origins in a report from the Eternal City on EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, October 31st, 2017. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. President Donald Trump says a former campaign aide thrust into the center of special counsel Robert Mueller's Russia probe has already proven to be a liar. On Twitter, the president says the fake news is working overtime. As Paul Manafort's lawyer said, there was no collusion, and events mentioned took place long before he came to the campaign. Few people knew the young, low-level volunteer named George, who has already proven to be a liar. Check the Dems. Despite the tweets, today the president deflected questions on the charges. White House correspondent Mark Irons has more. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. The case of George Papadopoulos goes right to the central question in the investigation. Did Russia try to sway the election, and did Trump's campaign know about it? Today, during an event on tax cuts, the president would not comment.
Thank you, everybody.
What's your reaction to George Papadopoulos?
Thank you very much.
Your reaction to the guilty plea, Mr. President?
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Questions in the White House briefing centered on the Russian probe. Former Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort is facing 12 charges, including money laundering. I spoke with a former IRS criminal investigator at Catholic University of America who says the charges are a good reminder to all Catholics.
The Catechism says that you have to be honest and that you have to pay legitimate taxes. Allegedly, Mr. Manafort didn't do that. Assuming he has done this, if he had followed the Catechism and followed the Ten Commandments, he wouldn't be in this predicament in the first place.
Manafort faces up to 80 years in prison, according to a review of the charges by the Associated Press. Professor Warren says special counsel Robert Mueller could use Manafort's testimony to gather evidence against the Trump administration. Professor Warren adds, once Manafort's criminal case is done, the IRS will be sending him a multi-million-dollar tax bill related to the assets he purchased in the U.S. using laundered money. Lauren.
Mark, what more can you tell us about the guilty plea filed by Papadopoulos and the potential sentence facing Manafort's longtime aide, Rick Gates?
White House spokeswoman Sarah Sanders says Papadopoulos is essentially a nobody, and he never worked on behalf of the campaign in an official capacity. His guilty plea signals he could avoid prison time as part of an apparent deal to cooperate with Mueller's team. As for Rick Gates, he faces decades in federal prison, up to 70 years, and millions of dollars in potential fines.
White House correspondent Mark Irons, thank you. Senators prepare to cast votes on the judicial nominee who was questioned about her Catholic faith. Dianne Feinstein, a Democrat from California, told Amy Barrett that the dogma lives loudly within her. And that phrase went viral on social media. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi says now that the debate spilled onto the Senate floor. Jason.
Lauren, Amy Barrett already survived a procedural vote with Republicans and 3 Democrats supporting her. But questions about her Catholic faith still linger over today's confirmation vote. That's why Republicans say they're standing up for religious liberty.
I'm shocked that this is still a conversation in our nation, that we become a nation that's become afraid of people of faith.
Republicans condemn what they call anti-Catholicism.
I think a great many of us had hoped we'd put those dark days behind us, that sorry chapter in our history had been relegated to the history books.
Senators last month questioned Notre Dame law professor Amy Barrett about her faith. President Trump nominated the Catholic mother of 7 to be an appeals court judge.
Do you consider yourself an Orthodox Catholic?
I am a Catholic, Senator Durbin.
The dogma lives loudly within you. And That's of concern.
Republicans say that's a religious litmus test, banned by the Constitution.
They were asking, do you actually believe that stuff? Do you actually believe the doctrine of your church? Do you believe it deeply, sincerely? Suggesting that if so, that was somehow a problem.
Illinois Democrat Dick Durbin defends his question. He says Barrett's the one in a law journal who brought up the phrase Orthodox Catholic.
That I was insinuating that Catholics can't serve on the bench. That is absurd. I'm Catholic myself. I deeply respect and value the freedom of religion in our country and our Constitution.
He says his no vote for Professor Barrett isn't about her faith.
She has no judicial experience.
Democrats and Republicans today debate Barrett's nomination on the Senate floor.
What's so dangerous, quite frankly, about her Catholic faith and her Christian beliefs? Are people afraid that she'll actually live out what the book of Proverbs says? To speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves?
The Senate can confirm Barrett with just a simple majority. That's because former Senate leader, Democrat Harry Reid, changed the Senate rules on all nominations except the Supreme Court. Republicans then applied that precedent to the Supreme Court to confirm Neil Gorsuch. Lauren?
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi, thank you. The Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense appear on Capitol Hill and say they are against making changes to the president's ability to declare war on terrorists.
The United States must retain the proper legal authorities to ensure that nothing restricts or delays our ability to respond effectively and rapidly to terrorist threats.
Congress believes the 16-year-old war authorization rules are outdated, but Secretary of Defense James Mattis tells a Senate panel the current rules allow the U.S. to act quickly without revealing battle plans. Kurdistan's president announces he will step down tomorrow as the region's leader. The move comes just weeks after a failed push for Kurdish independence from Iraq, and efforts to break away from Baghdad were brutally repressed. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby reports from the Pentagon. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. Military officials here say they will continue to support a unified Iraq, working with both Iraqis in Baghdad as well as the Kurdish in the north. But tensions continue to mount between the two sides about who controls key borders.
A top Kurdish official is denying reports that Iraqi forces have seized control of the Iraqi border with Turkey. The Kurdish military says the crossing is still under their control. Borders are a big issue after last month's Kurdish independence referendum. Baghdad says that vote was unconstitutional. The failed attempt at independence has destroyed the political legacy of the semi-autonomous region's president, Masoud Barzani. Barzani is widely respected for his efforts to provide Kurds a space to rule themselves, but now he's stepping down. The clashes between Kurdish troops and Iraqi forces in the north are forcing Christians to flee their homes. Outside this church in the Christian town of Al-Kosh, volunteers are distributing aid to displaced Christians living on the property. This Christian woman says she and her family have lost 2.5 years of their lives, first fleeing from ISIS, then from Iraqi Kurdish fighting. Despite all the problems, top American military leaders say they are confident there is a path to peace. Army Major General Joseph Jared, who has taken part in peace talks between both parties, says he's not worried Iraq will split up. I asked him via satellite from the Pentagon about the U.S. relationship with the Kurds and ISIS, also known as Daesh.
What it is about the Kurdish that have been so effective and what has made them good partners in the fight against ISIS.
Obviously, there's been some turmoil and tension between that relationship over the last couple of weeks, but the overriding sentiment between all of our relations is that they want to see a peaceful solution to this, and they want to make sure that we continue our efforts together to defeat Daesh.
Not everyone is satisfied with that answer. Here in Washington, supporters of Kurdish independence protested in front of the White House. They believe the United States should advocate for Iraq to be split, but President Trump and top military officials say they support a unified Iraq. Lauren?
Wyatt, it was heart-wrenching to see those pictures of Al-Kosh and the displaced Christians. As you know, I had the chance to visit that town with our team in April. Do we have any idea of how many of those families have lost their homes since the recent fighting?
We do, Lauren. Volunteers in the town estimate about 850 families have fled to Al-Kosh. Some of them have come from other nearby towns made up of Christians, like Bethniah, another town that you may be familiar with. But some of the Christians in that town say they can't go back home right now because their houses have either been destroyed completely or looted. Lauren.
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby reporting from the Pentagon. Thank you. Mourners rally outside a police station in Manila, where they say family members were killed illegally in President Rodrigo Duterte's war on drugs. The Catholic country's observance of All Souls Day often includes visits to deceased loved ones. Pope Francis names an Iraqi American as Bishop of Toronto's Chaldean Catholic Diocese. Bawai Suro was an auxiliary bishop in San Diego, an Iraq native. He defended President Trump's travel ban in an article in the San Diego Union Tribune in February. The Chaldean Diocese in Toronto has more than 37,000 Catholics. Today marks 500 years since Martin Luther nailed his thesis to a church door, challenging the Catholic Church and starting the Reformation. German Chancellor Angela Merkel took part in a service at the church where Luther posted the thesis. Thousands of visitors are participating in other church services and medieval-style events. Reformation Day is now a public holiday in Germany this year. Usually the holiday is recognized in only 5 German states. You can read in-depth articles about this right now at CatholicNewsAgency.com. Halloween is celebrated all over the world, but is it okay for Catholics to celebrate it? We asked a priest in Rome.
There's nothing wrong with kids dressing up in different costumes and going around trick-or-treating. It's actually a delightful thing. But without forgetting its connection with the Feast of All Saints, right, and the next day.
Father John Walk actually looked kind of spooky there, didn't he? He's a professor at the Pontifical University of the Holy Cross in Rome. The Chicago native reminds us it's the vigil of a great feast day, and children should be made aware of its true meaning. Juliet Lindley is EWTN News Nightly's Vatican correspondent. She joins us from Rome. Juliet, tell us more about the origins of Halloween.
Lauren, many would probably be surprised to know that it's actually one of the most Catholic feasts in the calendar. You know, the word Halloween comes from All Hallows Eve, and that would be the night before the day that the holy ones, the saints, are celebrated. So the word hallowed means holy, and we use it every day when we say the Our Father, hallowed be thy name. So Halloween is All Hallows Eve, and you could also call it All Saints Eve if you wanted.
Well, Halloween, that means, is originally a Catholic feast, but why do the celebrations often have to do with pagan or Gothic themes?
So the tradition of dressing up for Halloween dates back to earlier than the 16th century in Britain and Ireland and the early 20th century in the United States. Now, Father Walk told us that the origins of it could be either the medieval origin of guising, which would be putting on a disguise. Now, children in medieval times would go door to door, dress up in costumes, begging for sweets. And also the other custom of the Celtic tradition of warding off evil spirits by dressing up in scary, spooky outfits. So it's a confluence of these two traditions, the medieval and the Celtic, for what is essentially just before a very important Catholic celebration.
But Italians, do they celebrate Halloween now? Do children trick or treat?
Lauren, you know, no, not really. I mean, I have to tell you, children are a bit confused by all this jack-o'-lanterns and ghosts and bats, because we have Carnival in Italy, and that's just before Lent starts. And so they're more used to that. But of course, a lot of shops have jumped on the commercial bandwagon. So you do see shop windows covered in spider webs and witches and so on. But I would say that children here don't, as a tradition, celebrate it. They don't go trick-or-treating. More teenagers and young adults. Now, you do see clubs and pubs having a lot of Halloween-themed evenings. And that perhaps is where there is the danger that some of the behavior could border on the satanic or the occult. They do dress up very, very spookily and very ghoulish costumes. And that's where they can sort of forget that we're actually celebrating the saints that come the next day for All Saints.
Okay, all right, so I am not celebrating the saints right now. We do take this holiday very seriously, as you can see. I have on my Statue of Liberty outfit, and I'm sure that, I'm sure that you take this very seriously as well. Exactly.
Thank
Yes,
you,
you
Lauren.
do. All right. Thank you, Juliet, EWTN News Nightly Vatican correspondent. Coming up, the president and the media. Analysis with syndicated radio talk show host Chris Plante. Plus, asking for Our Lady's protection in a country fighting to protect the unborn.
Perché il regno cresca ci vuole il coraggio.
Pope Francis stresses Christians must be courageous and not afraid to dirty their hands. In his homily this morning, the Holy Father reminded the faithful to let hope, which comes from the Holy Spirit, guide our steps, and warned against those who impede the Spirit's place in our lives. Planned Parenthood is suing the state of Missouri for a second time over a portion of one of its pro-life laws. The suit aims to drop requirements for administering abortion pills. The regulation was passed this summer during a special session called by the state's pro-life governor. And President Trump is continuing his attacks on the media and its reporting of the Russia probe. The president says today in a tweet, the biggest story is not the special counsel's indictments of Paul Manafort and two others, but instead top Democrat lobbyist Tony Podesta stepping down from his post. He says Podesta's resignation, quote, has Dems in a dither. Joining us now, Chris Plante, host of The Chris Plante Show and former CNN Pentagon correspondent. Welcome to the program.
Well, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. The Washington Post today did a behind-the-scenes look of what happened yesterday when Donald Trump was sitting on the second floor of the White House watching all of this unfold. Is the media getting that story right?
Yeah, I mean, is it a day of the week that no, the news media is not getting the story. It's the story they want to tell. Look, the Washington Post started with that. CNN is all over that story today. MSNBC is all over that story today. It's the image that they want to paint. They don't know what the president was thinking. They don't know what the expression on his face was.
So you're saying there were no sources who were telling them that? Melania didn't call up the Washington Post and say, my husband is...
No, I mean, it honestly has reached the point of absurdity, though, hasn't it? And on this crusade, and the president is right, there is a giant story for the press to be pursuing. And look, I'm all for getting to the bottom. Was there any Russian tampering in the election? I want to know. If any Americans were involved in that, I want them held accountable. And I don't care what party they're from. But let's be honest, we've been looking very closely at this for about a year now. It's been under a microscope, the whole Russia collusion idea, and you couldn't fill a thimble with the evidence that they've accumulated so far.
Donald Trump is also saying all the time about how the media are getting it wrong, just as you're saying. You talked to the president, you interviewed him. Let's play a clip of what he said about the media to you.
CNN is a joke. NBC is a total joke. You watch what they report. It bears no relationship to what I'm doing. But the media is absolutely dishonest. And I have never seen, frankly, I've never seen anything quite like it.
Aren't there some journalists, however, who are doing a good job? Is the president going too far by saying what he said?
Well, he punches them pretty hard, but they deserve to be punched pretty hard. You know, are they a joke? There are some good people at CNN who are trying to do honest work, and at other places too. But the truth is, you never hear their names. You know, I mean, this is actually true. Having been in the news business for a long time and grown up in the news business in a news family, good, solid reporters do good, solid work, and they never make a big splash. Normally, you might break a big story from time to time.
Well, as the Washington Post broke the Democrat dossier story.
Well, you know, and the reality is that story was handed to them by the Clinton people because they wanted to get their spin on it before it came out either on Capitol Hill or through some lawsuit. A judge was about to order documents released that would have revealed who funded the dossier. So the Clinton people got to some friends at the Post so they could get their fingerprints on it and spin it when it was first rolled out. So I started out giving the reporters at the Post credit for breaking a big story. And then I realized I figured out over the course of the next couple of days what had actually happened, and there was nothing noble about it.
What about conservative media, people who defend Donald Trump, no matter what? And then we've got to wrap it up.
Well, look, sometimes it feels like the president is under such withering attack all of the time that while I don't defend everything the president says, I don't defend everything that he does. His Twitter account is obviously a bit out of control here and there, but the attacks are just completely disproportionate to the reality of what we're dealing with in the United States. And I understand the knee-jerk urge to defend the president. And sometimes what I tend to do is I look at the journalism and I look at the facts, and I fact-check the fact-checkers.
And do you find the facts are right?
Well, you know, that's the tricky thing about this business and the news business, is that sometimes you can have an article that's 3,000 words long, and there will be several points that are perfectly true and honest and truthful, verifiable. But the bulk of it turns out to be there for political reasons, and there are agendas behind things, and it's you know, it's a tricky game.
All right, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank
Chris
you.
Plante, host of The Chris Plante Show, former CNN Pentagon correspondent. A top court orders a cross be removed from a statue of St. John Paul II in Brittany, France. And the Prime Minister of Poland responds, saying she will bring the monument to her country, where St. John Paul II was born. A French court says the cross violates the separation of church and state. Poland Prime Minister Beata Szydło slams the ruling, calling it part of the dictates of political correctness. Ireland rededicates itself to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. The celebration took place earlier this month on the 100th anniversary of the last apparition of Our Lady in Fatima. It comes as Ireland braces itself for a referendum next year that could make abortion legal in the Catholic nation. Up next, the art of the Donald. I'll talk to the author of a new book about how Americans can achieve success the Trump way. Plus, trick-or-treating at the White House, Halloween celebrations for the first family, and some special ghouls and goblins. On this Halloween, the church remembers St. Wolfgang on his feast day. He was born in Germany and became a priest and missionary. St. Wolfgang was also the Bishop of Regensburg near Munich. The White House releases the official portraits of the president and vice president today. These will be the photographs distributed to federal facilities across the country of President Donald Trump and Vice President Mike Pence. Both images also are on sale to the public. The Art of the Donald is a new book about our president and his philosophy of life. Even the president endorsed the book on Twitter. Highly respected author Christopher Bedford just came out with the book, The Art of the Donald, Lessons from America's. Really good book. Joining us now is Christopher Bedford, author of The Art of the Donald and editor-in-chief at the Daily Caller News Foundation. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me. Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween. I know. I've had my Lady Liberty before. We're talking to our Rome team. There's no question, as you say, that Donald Trump was living the good life before he became president. And it's a lot harder now in the fishbowl. And he's actually almost being criticized for playing golf, as many presidents are. Tell us about what he needs to do in Washington to have his Art of the Donald good life continue.
Well, he needs to do what he's always done. So he's been underestimated. When he first left the boroughs and came into Manhattan and said, I want to build glass skyscrapers instead of brick tenements, no one took him seriously until he started to beat them. And when he first entered public policy with rebuilding Woolman Ice Rink, Mayor Ed Koch of New York attacked him, and everyone laughed at him. And he absolutely dominated and became a force in New York politics. When he first entered Republican politics, it was the same thing, dismissed by everyone. But just through his entire life, he's always been underestimated, and no one takes you seriously until you win. So he has to get some of his legislation passed. He has to get more than just executive orders and more than just restructuring the U.S. government passed. And at that point, I think he can go back to living a little bit better of a life here in D.C.
In your book, you write about the rules learned from President Trump. One, if you're doing something new, the old rules don't apply. Here's a section of that rule that you wrote about. Trust yourself. Trust the people on the ground. Solicit opinion from every source and do what you know to be right. Don't apologize for it. Does he apply this rule? Sure sounds to me like he applies this rule.
He certainly does. He's a big break from maybe even just the previous Republican nominee, Mitt Romney. He ignored the pollsters. He solicited advice from experts everywhere, partially because he didn't have a stable of experts like usual nominees did. And he used that to win, and he, as you've seen, he very rarely apologizes.
You say that this is a book that people should read who don't like Donald Trump. Why?
He beat them all, and he won, and this is a book about lessons, and it's kind of a funny book, too. Lessons you can take from his life and his strategy to dominate even if you're not president, to dominate in your local community, to do well with your family. He's a successful family man.
So even if you don't like it, you probably want to learn from it.
You do.
Okay.
You might do it again.
That's right. All right. Thank you so much, Christopher Bedford. The Art of the Donald, Lessons from America's Philosopher-in-Chief, and also Editor-in-Chief at the Daily Caller Foundation.
Thanks for having me.
Finally, tonight it wasn't about tricks and tweeting at the White House last night, but tricks and treating. The theme from the Munsters was playing as children from D.C. area schools and military families were invited to the White House for early trick-or-treating. It was decorated with these spider webs, that's kind of creepy, pumpkins, and one was even carved, I think, looked like George Washington. All of this while the President and First Lady handed out treats. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. We leave you tonight with a look at our Halloween celebration. Look at the firefighter in there. We have a pirate, and there's Wyatt Goolsby and his horse. There is our producer, Rodney Harris, getting his hair done by Victoria Stiles, our makeup artist. Segment producer, Elena, in her hat, all looking great. There's the team. Thank you so much. Good night, and God bless you.